So, good morning, afternoon, evening, all of you, wherever you may be. Today we are starting a new week with our discussion on Raga-vartma-candrika. So, we are in our 11th meeting today. We will be seeing today our last part of verse 11 from this first illumination of Raga-vartma-candrika, this moon ray illuminating, shedding light on the path of Raga. So today we are, I think, in our 5th session concerning this 11th verse or prose from the first part. So I think we will finish today. Let's see. So before that, of course, let's make a brief recap of what we were discussing in our previous meeting last Thursday. We are still in our explanation. We are trying to give some extended explanation on the second verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is including in his 11th verse. Now, he includes 3 important verses, as you may recall, from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu about the angas of Raga Nuga Bhakti. So we already went on with the first one, and we are discussing in length the second one, especially the idea of the Siddha Swarup in connection with Sadhaka Swarup, Sadhaka Rup, and so on. So he says in the second verse, Seva Sadhaka Rupena Siddha Rupena Chatrahe Tat Bhava Lipshunakarya Braja Lokana Shatara. This Raga Bhakti path, Sadhaka should serve both in his Sadhaka Deha, her Sadhaka Deha, and Siddha Deha, Siddha Rupa, let's say, following the wake of the restlessness of Raj, desiring to have feelings similar to a dear associate of Krishna of one's own choice. So we were already explaining a little bit this, what's the meaning of all this in the context of Sadhaka Deha, Siddha Deha. And in our previous meeting, we mainly tried to explain the difference between the concept of Siddha Rupa, that Rupa Goswami mentions here, and the Siddha Deha as a Bhava Deha, as a body, as an identity made of pure emotional, ecstatic content, if you will. So in this case, the Siddha Rupa, Srila Rupa Goswami is referring to, is not that so much a mystical intervention, if you will, from Sri Guru revealing our Bhava Deha, but it's something that it's formed through practice gradually. The Guru is giving some sort of, we say, prototype or placebo of working model. You choose the word you like the most. And this in time is being adjusted by Sri Guru in dialogue with her disciple. But when we speak about real spiritual identity, ultimate Bhava Deha, we are speaking about a total new sense of self by the deep descent of Swarup Shakti. So of course, this Raga Bhakti has to do with the transmutation, transformation of our sense of being, gradual one, because we cannot just throw out our present sense of identity and jump and rush into our ultimate identity. It's a gradual process, and we cannot remain bereft of some sense of identity at all, because we will go schizophrenic without any sense of identity altogether. So it's a gradual process of transformation when we are gradually getting, as the verse says here, identified with the emotions of a particular role model, of our own prospect and projection of a particular personality that we want to be, and gradually becoming more and more real. Also, we express this in terms of Sadharani Karana, that Rupa Goswami translates as commonality of emotions. When you gradually identify more and more with this, the best possible version of yourself in transcendence, if you will. So we also describe different stages that we need to go through till we'll reach this ultimate stage. Shravan, hearing about this information in theory, Varna, accepting your own affinity, such thing is there already, speaking with Guru, eventually engaging in some Smaram. There's 5 sub-stages of that. And then comes the 2 later stages, Bhava Apana, which has to do with Swarup Siddhi, and Sampati, which has to do with Bhashtu Siddhi. So also we mentioned how this idea of Siddha Pranali, of the bestowal of this identity from day one, sometimes is over-justified according to the very definition of Diksha, which we explained as a bestowal of divine knowledge. And also the Padma Purana says it represents an awareness of the Lord's constitutional identity at one specific relation with the Lord transmitted through a mantra. But again, we can make too much of that, and we can explain that in certain levels. So we already explained how, for example, a prerequisite for Raga Bhakti is lobha, intense lobha, on some level or another. So if you want to speak of getting in touch with your real eternal self, a certain level of adhikara is required there. Also, we quoted Raga-vartma-candrika, verse 9, where Sri Vishwanath said how there were 3 ways to receive this particular information: through a diksha, your diksha guru, siksha gurus, or by inner revelation through your own practice. And of course, there are some quotes in the scripture about meditating in Siddha Deha as a sadhana, but again, these are certain parameters, and we already shared in detail these parameters. There are certain krama or stages, systematic development. And also they are unbecoming examples of bestowing this information to unqualified vessels, if you will. We shared some ideas, some examples that had happened with certain devotees who didn't have the capacity of accommodating such a conception. So the idea is someone can receive this at a certain level, but not in the Kanishta level at all. And for many people, this is a business altogether. This is a cheating exchange as well. So in this way, and because of this having happening so much in history, our particular parivar, our lineage, allows this form of revelation, if you will, but in certain stages, as we mentioned, advanced nistha, or ruchi, or asakti. Advanced stages of sadhana bhakti, where our mind is under control of intellect, in nishta, or through taste in ruchi, or through spiritual attachment in asakti. But before that, if your mind is not under control, you will end up in a dead end, if you will. So the main emphasis in our particular parivaram, following the spirit of Bhakti Vinod, following the spirit of Mahaprabhu, the Bhagavat, and the Goswamis, we are not against Manasi Seva, Lila Shmara, and so on, but that will become very naturally out of Kirtan. Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta will establish this famous quote of his, Kirtana Prabhave, Shmarana Swabhave. By the force, by the strength of Kirtan, Swabhava, the nature, your own nature in connection to Shmarana will emerge more and more. So today we will dedicate our last session regarding this particular verse to analyzing a little bit more in detail about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's specific stance regarding this topic, of course in connection to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and as I said, of course in connection to Mahaprabhu, the Bhagavat, and our Grand Shastra Gurus, the Goswamis. So we will continue in connection to what we saw last class. So, well, where to begin? Yeah, our line, basically, I could say our line is following mainly Bhaktisiddhanta's stand in the present moment, who established this idea that Siddha Deha will come, but as a result of your, let's say, expert chanting of Siddha mantras. You want to Siddha Deha? Okay, you have already a Siddha mantra. You have the Maha mantra. No, Siddha means perfect. Mantra that can bestow all perfection, like a kalpa vriksha, if you will, desired tree. You have Maha mantra, and we have also some Diksha mantras, in our lineage. Mainly of them, most importantly, Gopal mantra and Kam Gayatri. All of them considered Siddha mantras. So you want Siddha Deha, you have the Siddha mantra. Properly embrace of the Siddha mantra gives as a result Siddha Deha. And this idea, as I mentioned, is supported by, as I mentioned, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami's commentary to Krishna Karnamrita, Rupa Goswami's stance, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, on the example of Mukopa Kumar, and also following the examples that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is giving in this verse of Raga-vartma-candrika. Remember, the sages of Dandakaranya, the personified Shrutis, and so on. We know that the sages of Dandakaranya, eventually they are called as the Munichari Gopis. They are sadhana siddha gopis, and they attain Swarup Siddhi by perfecting their chanting of their Diksha mantras, so to say, by the chanting of their Gopal mantra. So by the perfected chanting of this perfect mantra, Siddha mantra, they obtain their Siddha Deha as gopis in Braj. According to the Padma Purana as well, Gayatri herself desired Gopi Bhav, And in this way, she incarnated as Gopal Tapani Upanishad, Gopal Tapani Shruti. We were speaking about the personified Shrutis. And there in Gopal Tapani, we find the Kama Bij, the Gopal mantra are being revealed. And so again, in connection to how these Siddha mantras can bestow one's ultimate identity. Jiva Goswami also mentions that the Gopal mantra, the 18 syllable Gopal mantra, in relation to Raganuga sadhana, he mentioned this mantra in terms of its relevance for advanced sadhakas, as well as neophytes, but also for advanced sadhakas. Actually, in his Bhakti Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami, he's instructing that this mantra is chanted by advanced devotees who, when they are doing this, they are envisioning the Leela of Krishna. As well, and this mantra is chanted as well by neophytes who chant that with a view of attaining such vision. As Mura sometimes quotes, you chant this mantra with the hope of, may my Guru bless me so I may become part of Braj, if you will. So no matter which is your stage, neophyte or advanced, this type of Siddha mantras will surely nourish this project of eternal identity. And as we quoted Brihad-bhagavatamrita, there Gopa Kumar is chanting Gopal mantra in conjunction with Nam Sankirtan, and that gave Gopa Kumar his ultimate Braja Bhakti, Swarup. Sanatana Goswami explains this there. He explains that Gopa Kumar was instructed in Dwarka by Narada and Uddhava to return to early Braj, to Bhoma, Vrindavan, and perform their Nam Sankirtan, and through which he could easily attain his final destination, which was being a Priyanarmasaka there, Sarup. So the point is that upon attaining such realization, we may call it Vastu Siddhi, the entering into Golok. Krishna mantra, generally say that will retire, while Krishna Nam will be chanted in such a liberating condition, with the delivering one to the lotus feet of Krishna, which we call Vastu Siddhi. Chaitanya Charitamrita Siddhis. Krishna mantra haiti have, samsara mochan, Krishna Nam haiti pave, Krishnera charan. The Krishna mantra will free you from samsara. There are different elements. Of course, there are other things we can say, but Krishna Nam haiti have, haiti pave, Krishnera charan. But Krishna Nam will take you to the feet of Krishna. And there's a subtle difference between these 2 points. Swarup Siddhi, Vastu Siddhi. We know the famous also statement, for example, of Siddha Mahatmas. We are speaking about Siddha Deha, Siddha Mantras, and also Siddha Mahatmas like Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. So he mentioned your Siddha Deha is there in the Nam. All is there in the syllables of Sri Nam. Everything is present there. And this idea is not only limited to our particular stance. I remember last lecture we quoted some words for some member of the Advaita Parivar, speaking about this Siddha Deha being something that is formed through practice. And also we have statements like, for example, Haridas Shastriji, who is one of the main representatives of the Gadadhar Parivar in contemporary times, the guru of Satyanarayan Das Babaji. And Haridas Shastriji, he mentioned also in this context regarding how Harinam can bestow everything. He said, nor the Acharyas and nor either the Goswamis, they received Siddha Pranali. All was revealed to them through Nam. And he concluded by saying, if we don't have faith in this fact that everything can be revealed through Nam, we are making Nam something secondary, and some other things, we are becoming that thing more prominent than Sri Nam. So he presented this simple logic that of course makes perfect sense. And it's delicate because it can also be, I don't want to enter into demonizing anyone, but very subtly, you can engage in the aparad, that is not having full faith in Sri Harinam. This is one of the 10 Nam aparads to avoid. So if you start to lay excessive emphasis on something else and do not really realize the all importance and all potential of Sri Nam, you can easily engage in Nam aparad. Why not? So we should be careful about that. So going back to Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta, as we mentioned, he emphasized the engagement in kirtan, and it may seem, because of his strong stance, that as we will see, that he even seemed to reject the whole Siddha Pranali issue altogether, but actually it's not like that. It seemed that he was rejecting that. It's the same way that it seemed like Buddha was rejecting the Veda, but actually he was promoting an adjustment in order to eventually embrace a more substantial approach to the Veda. In the same way, Bhaktisiddhanta seemed, it seemed to be rejecting the system, but actually he was proposing its very essence. We have to, for this, engage a little bit in history, and travel in time and understand a little bit the condition of the Sampradaya at that time, at the time of Bhaktivinoda even. So if we really, as Guru Maharaj mentions in his Guru Parampara booklet, that the condition of the Sampradaya during the time of Bhaktivinoda was evidence in itself of the negative effects of this Siddha Pranali Diksha given to unqualified people. Most of the people at that time were considering that the Gaudiyas were just like a pseudo religion that was just designed for those who wanted to be licentious, who wanted to enjoy their senses and have some good excuse for that, some mystical reason. So we know Bhaktivinoda Thakur was someone totally dedicated to restoring the dignity of Gaudiya Vedanta. And Bhaktisiddhanta naturally continued in that vein. He followed the spirit. Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself empowered him in doing so. So he emphasized Kirtan and over Smaran in this particular context. And also we mentioned, his emphasis is not wrongly or wrongly founded, but we found this point that how Siddha, we already quoted many verses in previous lectures about how Kirtan is the main limb of Raga Bhakti and how Siddha Deha proper comes as an outcome of proper Kirtan and proper practice in advanced stages. For example, in Priti Sandarbha, we may add this interesting quote. Jiva Goswami in Priti Sandarbha, he's mentioning that the Siddha Deha is given by God when one becomes qualified to enter the spiritual world. Because it's a body fit for a certain service in a certain realm. So as long as you are not getting closer to there, you won't need such an identity, if you will. That's the experience of Narada Muni, famous verse in the first canto, 6th chapter of the Bhagavad, when he mentions to Vyasa how he was, how he received, he was given a particular identity. He mentions this prayujamane, he used the word. I've been bestowed, I have been given this particular identity at certain particular point, as we know. The story of Narada is very instructive in this regard, showing the different stages in practice. So there is no evidence, again, going back to Bhaktisiddhanta, that he himself in his life received Siddha Pranali himself from Sri Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, nor there is evidence that he received Siddha Pranali from his father and guru, most prominent guru figure, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But at the same time, even though, interestingly, officially he didn't receive that information, we know that Bhaktisiddhanta conceived of his own spiritual identity as the handmaiden of Radha, Nayana Mani Manjari. He made that clear. There is evidence for that. He wrote one letter when this information is expressed by him, which is a realization that if you will like to think of him as a sadhana siddha, it's a realization that will have awakened to grace, to practice, to the kind of sadhana that he himself was promoting, basically. So he himself was showing example. I'm not emphasizing this, but I have reached this level of insight. So in the same way as there is no evidence that Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati received this Ekadasha Bhava or Siddha Pranali, there is no either strong evidence that he gave that to others. But it is said that it may be possible that he gave that to some qualified disciples, some in the clandestine way, if you will, not in an open way, let's say. Some disciples of his disciples mentioned that their guru received from Bhaktisiddhanta this, but again, we cannot officially prove that. There is one famous letter, that's a fact, that Bhaktisiddhanta wrote to Kunja Bihari, Vidyabhushan, Kunja Babu, eventually Bhakti-Vilas Tirtha Maharaj. And that's a famous letter where Bhaktisiddhanta speaks of himself as Nayana Mani Manjari, and speaks about Kunja Babu in terms of his own Manjari identity. So again, there are some glimpses here and there, but there is no official evidence that he was bestowing here this to anyone. And also there is no record or testimony that Bhaktisiddhanta was given, let's say, extensive personal instructions on Astakaliya, Leela, Shmaran, except some few occasions. One of the main ones, maybe counted with the fingers of one hand, one well-known occasion that Guru Maharaj also quotes in an appendix to his Guru Parampara booklet. It's when this talk that was titled "From Anartha Nivriti to Artha Pravriti." This is a lecture that Bhaktisiddhanta delivered in 1932 at Radha Kund. So let me share with you some brief excerpts of that very briefly. So for you to have a clear idea of his approach to the topic. He said, all these days, we have not spoken about Lila. Why? Because this is our most confidential asset. This is our only sadhya. But one should not make the mistake of thinking that anartha nivriti is the prayojan. One thinking like this will never enter into artha pravriti. For this reason, I will begin speaking about Astakaliya Lila Shmaran. This is transcendental reality. If we do not know of this transcendental realm, then all our efforts may end in nirvishesh bada, Brahman or something. Those who have chanted the Harinam for 15 or 20 years should know these things. The beginners need not hear these topics or they will be misunderstood. So we see, this very spirit of Bhaktisiddhanta stands here. He was not, like in examples like this, we see Bhaktisiddhanta was not necessarily denying his followers access to this reality, but he was mainly stressing a more cautious approach because of the situation at that time. And again, it's not only him. Actually, many outside his lineage also agreed with him on this point. For example, there's the case of, apart from other examples we already shared in previous lectures, the example of the famous Radhakrishna Goswami. He wrote one book in the 17th century called Sadhana Deepika, and he quotes their renunciation to household life as a prerequisite for entering the mysteries of Manjari Bhav. So we already quote similar examples in previous lectures. And on the other hand, we see, those for Bhaktisiddhanta, in Bhaktisiddhanta's eyes, those who have an understanding that it was too liberal, and too liberal understanding of eligibility, for Bhaktisiddhanta, they were fitting into a group, generic group that he termed sahajas. That is based on the etymology of the word sahaja. Sahaja means easy. Sometimes it may mean natural. Actually, it's not a bad word. The gopis are called aprakrita sahajas in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which has to do with someone totally supramundane who has a spontaneous love for Krishna. That's another thing. But here's sahajas, not aprakrita. We have aprakrita sahajas, gopis and brajavasis. We have sahajas, which are the people who take these issues in a cheap way. And we have prakrita sahajas, which are the worst case, if you will. So prakrita sahajas are the ones who are engaging in immoral activities, like making a parallel between the romantic affairs of Radha and Krishna on their own, if you will. But Bhaktisiddhanta in this case is referring to those who take the esoteric practices too cheaply, not to the point of immorality, but trying to enter into those mysteries without having proper adhikar, sahajas. But there is a distinction between those sahajas and those that Bhaktisiddhanta named prakrita sahajas. And again, we have on the other side aprakrita sahajas. So let's go for a minute to the condition of the Sampradaya during Bhaktisiddhanta's times in connection to this Sahajism, if you will, because that will help us to further understand his point and how that point should be, what we should do nowadays with that point. Should we really keep that same level of emphasis? Should we make it more heavier, lighter, deeper, higher? What's the adjustment that nowadays times require? We will try to think about that as well. Because if not, we will maybe engaging in what we sometimes call historical presentism, which means you are trying to understand the past, but from the viewpoint of present. You are not doing the task, the job of traveling in time and entering there. So what happened at that time? Well, certain people were, as Guru Maharaj mentions also in Guru Parampara booklet, they were stressing certain liberal statements from Vishwanath Chakravarti. Well, when I say liberal, I mean too ecstatic. We know certain statements from Vishwanath Chakravarti about bhakti, about how effective bhakti is, and about how you don't need to practically, you can do anything, but if you have slight connection with bhakti, that's the all in all. So we have to understand those Baba-like expressions. So the point is that regarding those type of liberal, if you will, expressions that were intended to glorify the efficacy of bhakti over that of Gyan Marga and other paths, now, there was a point in this intense glorification of bhakti. But the point is that many Babajis at that time, and still even today, not only at the time, from Aradhakund or other areas in Braj, they maintain this idea that the only sin a Vaishnava can commit is Vaishnava Parad. So the point is, they want to say, if I'm not engaged in Vaishnava Parad, well, whatever I'm doing is just like thing because bhakti is so powerful. But this lends to a liberal attitude with regard to like immoral conduct. So that was happening at that time. And a lot of so-called renunciants were not that renunciants as well, actually. So the point is that the repercussion, the reaction of that was that the public opinion of Gaudiya Vaishnavism was at a very low level, as we mentioned. So much that actually pious people, intelligent people consider Gaudiya Vaishnavism again nothing more than a so-called religion that was designed to give license to immorality. So you can try to travel in time, because we are not experiencing that now in that form. Maybe Gaudiya Vedanta may be criticized for other reasons mainly, but at that time this was really strong in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of the world, if you will. At that time in India, Gaudiya Vedanta was in this way. So the Sampradaya became totally, let's say, marginalized. And it became so marginalized that the famous example is there. Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted to locate one copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is in one sense the main text of the tradition, if you will. He was not able to do so. So it means that was really marginalized. So the point is that such condition is the evidence, shows the evidence of the negative effects, again, at least in part of Siddha Pranali Diksha given to unqualified people. So the goal of Bhaktisiddhanta and the goal of Bhaktivinoda before him, but very especially Bhaktisiddhanta establishing Gaudiya Math and giving form to Bhaktivinoda's ideas, was a reform movement to reestablish the lost prestige, if you will, of the Sampradaya. And how he tried to do that, how he tried to really focus in that direction, trying to uproot this moral, let's say, like laxity, you say, this moral laxity he tried to uproot that was promoted by immature culture of so-called Raganuga sadhana. So it's important to understand the details of the time. There's a very nice book also I will recommend to whoever would like to read, written by Ferdinando Sardella, who's called the book is Modern Hindu Personalism. And he makes a really interesting depiction of the times where Bhaktisiddhanta started his Gaudiya Math and all the issues he had to deal with, including some of this as well. So let's recall for a moment with the idea of understand how this stance of Bhaktisiddhanta was not only something connected to time, place, and circumstance and a social dynamic, but something deeply rooted in Shastra, the proper approach to these esoteric topics. Jiva Goswami in Bhakti Sandarbha, he's mentioning 276, that Smaran, even of the holy name, only on just of the holy name, what to speak intimate Leelas of Radha Krishna, requires a pure heart, requires subjugating the mind, we said. And later, Jiva Goswami said, when the mind is purified by the process of surrender, again, he emphasizes Saranagati here, one should practice the devotional item of recollection without giving up Nam Sankirtan. So the idea is, you are already supposed to be engaged in Nam Sankirtan in the context of Saranagati, in such a way that your mind gets subjugated and eventually, naturally, you can enter, your mind associates with the Leela, if you will. And finally, also in his Bhakti Sandarbha, he mentions that, but the intimate pastimes should not be meditated upon by those whose senses are affected by masculine transformations. In other words, if you are affected by Purusha Bhav, by feeling yourself to be the male or the enjoyer, let's say, you will misunderstand everything, and you will go to the intimate Leelas and you will feel Krishna is a competitor to you, or you are him, or whatever, who knows which mess can be done there. So on the basis of this type of premises that were originally revealed by our Shastra gurus, is that Bhaktisiddhanta fashioned, if you will, his own quote unquote approach to realizing one's spiritual identity. Again, it's not his own, it's deeply rooted in our tradition. But he presented it in a particular way for the times being, how to engage in Raga-nuga sadhana in such a way that the practices are based on practices that predate, if you will, Siddha Pranali Diksha. We already saw that. This Siddha Pranali Diksha was not presented by the Goswamis in a clear, overt way. We were another system that came in time. And so the approach, Bhaktisiddhanta's approach, has a deep foundation in Shastra. And as we say, he will lay more stress on Kirtan than in Smaran. Kirtan Prabhava, Smaran Swabhava. And we also mentioned Kirtan is the main limb of Raga Bhakti. Jiva Goswami establishes that in his Bhakti Sandarbha. Mahaprabhu himself is saying in Chaitanya Charitamrita also, of the Navanga, Navalaksham Bhakti, this 9-limbed Bhakti, the most important, and this is Smaran is included there, Shravan Kirtan, Vishnu Smaran, and so on. The most important is always chanting the name of Hari, always, Kirtaniya Sada Hari. And he says, if you do so, avoiding the 10 offenses, 10 namaparad, very easily you obtain the most valuable jewel of love of God. So he's saying, you can obtain everything through chanting, basically, Mahaprabhu himself. But we also explain how Smaran will eventually manifest in the context of that culture and so on. And as we also mentioned, of course, it's true that for Nam Kirtan to blossom into Prem Bhakti, as Mahaprabhu himself mentions here, generally you need some specific education. You have to learn how to chant the name with some Bandha Gyan, mature Bandha Gyan, proper knowledge of your relationship with Krishna. So in this connection, Bhaktisiddhanta also, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself did, he strongly emphasized this principle of siksha as well. Chanting, but siksha. Of course, diksha is there, but siksha, to the point of his concept of siksha parampara. So a proper kirtan with proper sambandha gyan, with proper siksha, that type of kirtan will create the eventual absorption of one's mind, as we mentioned. So let me share one quote from Guru Maharaj from his Guru Parampara booklet in this regard. He mentions a very interesting thing in regard to the conception of kirtan of Bhaktisiddhanta in connection with preaching and absorbing one's mind with one's own faculties and so on. So he says like this: to preach and propagate in such kirtan was, in Bhaktisiddhanta's estimation, the most powerful means for subjugating the mind, giving rise to internal meditation upon the actual lila. In contrast, to sit in the jungle and practice lila smaran is no easy task. Without a pure heart, one's mind is likely to prevail rather than the lila. Comparatively, how mentally consuming is the task of propagating the esoteric theology of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in modern language to a world under the influence of an entirely different meta-narrative. So this is a very clear point, how Bhaktisiddhanta really thought about that. From his own absorption, he came out and thought about the way of invoking that absorption in the case of most of us. And in this context, in the context of this type of ideas, is that, as we mentioned in previous classes, how he conceived the printing press to belong to the Raga Marga section, to the Raga Marga, to the Raga-nuga sadhana. The picture in the logo of Gaudiya Math, the printing press is on the Raga-nuga section. So with that, he implied a type of kirtan that has to do with the extension of the message, the preaching and absorption and engagement that will subjugate the mind in such a way that naturally Lila Smaran will come there. So we need to really understand such an interesting point he wanted to make there. Also, we could make the argument that at that time of Bhaktisiddhanta, and what to speak in the years to come after that, try to understand, society was becoming increasingly absorbed in fruitive activities for the pleasure of the body. It was a main symptom of the industrial age. They were. So an even stronger stress on certain Shastric cautions was regarding the eligibility of Raganuga Bhakti was required, because society as a whole was becoming much more engrossed in materialism, if you will. And also a more conservative stance was necessary because of the nature of the meditation itself. Lila Smaran. I mean, try to understand. You want to absorb in the amorous life of God. It's a process prone to exploitation, basically. If for sensual motives, either subtle or gross, if you are not properly prepared, you can really engage in lots of exploitation in that realm. So he took a really conservative stance, but from an inner, a very deep and profound inner stance he already had in his own insight, as we all see. So in this way, Bhaktisiddhanta basically considered the practice, the propagation of kirtan, of the Harikatha, of the holy message, dissemination of Mahaprabhu's creed as central for the internal spiritual development of his disciples. We have to remember that, like the essence of Raga Bhakti is the disposition to try to enter into the mood of the Brajavasis, of the Nitya Parikars in Vrindavan. We already explained that. But we know it's not only about, as Gurunath will say, knowing about what are their names, what's the color of their skirt, what's the name of their father-in-law, where's the village they live in. Those things may be there, but they are details. But the principle is try to get in touch with their psychology, or try to get in touch with the bhav, try to get in touch with their selfless service disposition. Because if we cannot appreciate the full degree of surrender there, you will be just misunderstanding what's going on in the Parabhyam. So the essence of Raga Bhakti is the disposition of selfless service that we find in the residents of Raj. So Bhaktisiddhanta, by creating this particular dynamic, he wanted to create that type of absorption. His disciples entering into particular disposition of selfless service in the context of being guided by someone who has firm standing in Vrindavan consciousness, if you will. Pujala Ragapata Gaurava Bangi Matala Harijan Vishaya Rangi Kirtana Rangi. So his sense was mainly that, try to develop such an attitude, no? As he will say, don't try to see God. Try to act in such a way that God wants to see you. He will want to see you. So this was his point, not trying to rush there and you yourself trying to impose your own desire on that realm, but try to develop certain selflessness, certain disposition of service that will be so irresistibly attracted to the all attractive, he will become drawn to you. That's the most safe stance. And regarding this disposition of service, of course, he emphasized so many, the proper moral character and proper culture of specific attributes, Vaishnava Maryat, which we call sometimes Vaishnava etiquette, as we much explained the other day. Someone asked him, what's your opinion of Vaishnava etiquette, how devotees should play that out? And he went immediately to the third verse of Sikshastakam. He said, for me, this is the most important thing that summarizes the whole idea of Vaishnava etiquette. So interestingly, in this regard, the disposition of proper service disposition, it is significant that once it is said that Bhaktisiddhanta was challenged at Radhakund. Someone came and said, and asks him, do you have a Siddha mantra? Someone asked him, have you received, the idea was, have you received a Siddha mantra in the context of Siddha Pranali and so on? And he said, yes, I have a Siddha mantra. And he quoted, Trinada Pisanichena Tarora Pisagishnuna, Amanina Manadina Kirtaniya Sadahari. If you really understand that, that's a Siddha mantra. Krishna does say, you chant Harinam, embracing this idea, this mantra of third sloka of Sikshastakam, you will attain Prem, you will attain Siddhi, perfection. By following this example of this verse of Sikshastakam, Trinada Pisunishena, humbler than the blade of grass. Humility in the words of Bhaktisiddhanta means absence of the enjoying spirit. Enjoying spirit is Purushabhav. Purushabhav means that thing that we have to get rid of if we really want to enter into meditation on the romantic affairs of the Godhead. So he really had everything in place and knew how to connect one thing with the other. So he made so many important points here. So he stressed on a moral foundation, the point is to spiritual practice, was influenced by many things, and of course, no doubt was influenced, as we mentioned, by his perception of the climate of the time, the religious climate of the world, not only in India, but of the world at the time. And of course, we could say he was influenced by Mahaprabhu's own example as Sri Chaitanya. Sri Krishna Chaitanya is a sannyasi. Remember how his Mahaprabhu's observance of sannyas was so strict. The moral implications that are described in his life, in his hagiographies, were extremely strict, that other sannyasis, as Guru Maharaj will say, were trembling, senior sannyasis, by seeing the level of his strictness, by observing his moral duties. He was compared to Ramachandra as how much Maryat he had, how much strictness, and so on. So Bhaktisiddhanta was in that type of example, like being a staunch sannyasi, very moral, very upright. But as we have seen and we will see, he had a whole passionate inner life there. So on one side, he was discouraging, apparently he was discouraging solitary bhajan, nirjan bhajan, that we may be based on the Astakaliya Lila Shmaran for the reasons we already explained. And on the other side, he was a strong proponent of, again, intense engagement in kirtan, nam kirtan sadhana, for personal purification. But again, at the same time, he had his own inner life. Before he started the whole Gaudiya Math, before he started his whole preaching campaign, actually, he was deeply absorbed in meditation. He was in the forest and he was chanting, he made a vow of chanting 1 billion names, which implies chanting 3 lakhs or 192 rounds by approx per day for almost 10 years. So that's not a cheap thing. You cannot just sit in the jungle and do that. So actually, he was not inclined towards preaching. It is said that it was Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the one who pushed him, who inspired him in that direction. But his own nature, he had a nature towards bhajan. It's not that, oh no, he had a very practical nature and he was not able to sit in bhajan like some other sons of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he needed to preach, like implying that was not so high. No, actually, for him, as Guru Maharaj will say, for him, it was difficult to get up from his bhajan. For us, it may be difficult to sit and enter in bhajan. For him, it was difficult to leave his bhajan and start preaching. So on the basis on that bhajan and preaching, as we know, eventually some mystical, after he finished this vow in the jungle, one paper came with one verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Mahaprabhu was instructing, I think, Sanatana Goswami about these things that he asked the Goswamis: establish temples, set an ideal example of preaching, worship deities, rediscover Leelas, Salis, and so on. So we see, no? His preaching, represented in this paper, came as a result of his bhajan, of his absorption. In other words, his preaching was an overflowing of his own practice, as Guru Maharaj will say. All this was the basis for properly engaging everything in seva. He had this idea: everything has to engage in seva. Everything is potential paraphernalia to serve Hari. Of course, there are risks as well. It's not so cheap to say, okay, everything is potential service for Krishna. Yeah, but you need to have certain purity for such an engagement. Bhaktisiddhanta had it, but there are some risks there as well. Guru Maharaj says in his Guru Parampara booklet, he mentions, when we employ modern technology, such as computers in Kirtan, we are doing that right now, so be careful. There is potential to be employed by that technology in the name of employing it in divine service. So there's a very fine line that requires sincerity. Without sufficient stress on the inner life of bhajan, one's kirtan can become more musical than mystical. Preaching ego effacement can be tinged with self-promotion. Employing modern technology can result in fascination with megabytes rather than their maker. So Guru Maharaj puts that in a very incredible way here. So we should be very honest and sincere about being introspective about our own motives in the name of Yukta Vairagya, in the name of preaching, in the name of engaging everything in the service of Krishna. It's not so easy. It requires, as he says here, sufficient stress on the inner life of bhajan. And Bhaktisiddhanta had that stress, and he was thus justified and able to say everything needs to be engaged in service of Krishna. He was given the example of that. Like when someone asked, why you are riding a car, you are a sadhu. And he replied, only sadhus should ride cars. Only Vaishnavas should ride. Cars are created for Vaishnavas, for Vaishnavism. But of course, Bhaktisiddhanta was not only criticizing whatever was wrong outside in the world, he also had a lot of self-critique with his own tradition. And actually that took him to take the particular stance he took regarding this adjustment. So he was really auto-critical with his own tradition, and not many appreciated that. Some even want to kill him, as you know. So since he has this self-critique, so let's ourselves we also have this auto-critique again in our present times, because it's not just copy and paste magical formula that Bhaktisiddhanta or Srila Prabhupada applied 50, 100 years ago. We need to reevaluate, reconfigure, update the adjustment, how we need to take that idea and play that out nowadays. Because in the same way, as we can use the principle of Yukta Vairagya as an excuse for justifying our attachments, there are also some other, like, let's say, professional risks if we try to adopt Bhaktisiddhanta's stance without proper introspection. So let's briefly mention some of them. For example, he was an innovative person, a creative person, and every time that there is some legitimate, real bona fide innovation in presenting spiritual principles, which is a requisite generally, also there is some danger for those who resist the change, resist the necessary innovation, but also there is some danger for those who adopt the innovation as well. The ones who resist the change, the resistors, if you will, of change, they are risking becoming, ineffective in the communication of their principles, getting out of update, if you will, by keeping them in the format that is no longer relevant. And the ones who adopt the change, also they are risking in regarding of giving too much emphasis to the innovative aspect of that and obscure the principles, the real principles, and not understanding that the innovation is still a detail to deliver the principle. So again, risk is in every direction whenever innovation is coming. And we have seen that through our own history, and we are still seeing that. Of course, the teacher, someone like Bhaktisiddhanta in this case, may be aware, cognizant, that he's emphasizing a point from a broader context, if you will. But maybe his students may not be aware of that, of the intention behind the point, if you will. And maybe the natural inclination of the students is just kijai, if you will, at least an immature one. Their inclination will be to overemphasize the point that was stressed, to engage in some form of what we call niyamagraha, just follow something without understanding its purpose, its intention, without understanding the insight behind the point that was being made, basically. And I try made a point that is relative and it's a detail, but behind that point, that detail, there's a very absolute insight. But if we only get the relative detail and not go to the absolute insight behind, we may engage in niyamagraha, and that may harm our bhakti. So, trying to give a conclusion of all these points, the practice of so-called Vaidhi Bhakti that Bhaktisiddhanta emphasized actually was, as we know, Ajata Ruchi Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. He sometimes referred to that type of bhakti as Vaidhi Bhakti. But the point is that that type of bhakti that he emphasized was never meant to be disconnected from the rich tradition of Raga Marga, seen as something different from that and taking a distance from that. So this is a caution that is especially relevant for us, grand disciples and so on, who may have no connection, if you will, with a particular historical situation in which Bhaktisiddhanta was present, with Indian thought and culture before encountering, the mission of Sri Chaitanya's petals. We may not have that experience, so we need to be aware of these details. So, of course, there are people who will criticize Bhaktisiddhanta for the wrong reasons, people who will follow Bhaktisiddhanta's points here for the wrong reasons. So on one side, his detractors may for sure will misunderstand the necessity, many of them, the necessity of an innovation of his presentation, which was again really innovative, and may view him as a deviant, someone who is going against the Sampradaya. But also again, his followers will also misunderstand him. They will misconstrue the context of his teachings, and as a result, they will start to see him maybe as independent from the tradition. He created his own sampradaya, he's whatever. over-glorification, over-glorifying, if you will, of the Guru. No? Out of feeling, but not out of tattva. No? And in such a way that he's left behind the whole lineage that is giving himself support. So all the things we should really think about ourselves as members, contemporary members of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, what is expected from us when we try to represent someone like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So again, the criticism that Bhaktisiddhanta made, Ekadashabhab, Siddha Pranali, and so on, was not criticism of the practice in itself. And also he was not criticism implying that the Acharya, a real Acharya, is incapable of serving as a medium for the revelation of the spiritual identity of a qualified disciple. He was not saying that. If there's qualified disciple, qualified guru, that revelation can take place. And it seems that he himself did that, engage in that to a certain degree. So his main point, his main censure, you say, was against the attempt of trying to supersede Krishna's will, if you will, by one premature imposition, indiscriminate imposition of some specific role in Krishna Lila upon those who were, of course, obviously not ready for that, not fit for that, no adhikar. But again, when proper adhikar is there, of course, she was blessing, proper nourishing at that particular point. So let's finish this section, but briefly giving a recap of what's the standpoint of Bhaktisiddhanta regarding the contemporary practice of Raganuga Bhakti, and see what we can do now from our particular situation. So he, on one side, he gave credence, you say, to the ideal of the advanced meditations in our tradition, Lila Smaranam, Manasu Seva, but also he gave strong position to the Shastra caution against like a premature adoption of the discussion of and practice of everything related to rasa and advanced mellows and so on. And his cautions, of course, were supported by Shastra, and for the reasons that we already shared here, he was still, although his points were supported by Shastra, his own stance was even more conservative in his instructions on Raga Bhakti, Raga Marga, even than the teachings and books of his predecessors. There is already some caution, as we say, in the scripture, and he was even more cautious than all of them, even Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because again, of the particular present moment dynamics when he was in. So he was conservative, in his approach to the Raganuga sadhana, but he was at the same time not recommended just by the bhakti, towards Vaikuntha or something like that. Even though he may have used the term, actually he was promoting what we mentioned already, Ajata Ruchi Raganuga sadhana bhakti, which is a practice that, as we mentioned, has a conscious regard for scriptural injunctions, combined with some appropriate internal culture of spiritual life, especially Nam Kirtan, hearing Hari Katha from advanced Vaishnavas and other practices of Putan Bhakti, in connection to attaining the ultimate goal of Braj Bhumi, Nitya Navadvip as well. And he had this confidence. He was especially confident that on the basis of Shastra, on the basis of what Mahaprabhu and the Goswamis and the Bhagavad say, Nam Kirtan is far the best method to achieve full accomplishment in devotion, including the revelations of one's Siddha's eternal relationship and identity, relationship with Krishna. So he let it be known that although matters of Raganuga Bhakti should be approached with the topmost caution, he also mentioned that the full wealth of the tradition in terms of Raga Bhakti, Raga Marga, was available to those who had the adhikar for that, a proclivity for such meditation, who qualified themselves by proper engagement in kirtan. Those things were there available to them. And again, he conceived this idea of kirtan in a dynamic way. He viewed preaching and the distribution, proliferation of kirtan, which requires, again, a very passionate, if you will, dedication to service attitude, as something helpful, if not essential, for purifying, subjugating the mind, and in this way evoking mercy of Guru, Krishna, Vaishnavas, and eventually attaining devotion to the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu, which award eternal eternal standing in Braj. No? So some ideas I wanted to share with you regarding Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta's stance regarding to make a full circle regarding our analysis of this second verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is quoting in his 11th verse here of Raga-vartma-candrika. So before finishing, give me some few minutes, please. I will finish the 11th verse by quoting the third verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Vishwanath includes in this 11th verse of his. And I will do that now because it's actually this remaining part of the 11th verse of Raga-vartma-candrika is just an introduction to a list of topics that will be elaborated on in the next verse. So let me finish with this third verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Vishwanath includes in his 11th verse. And starting from the 12th verse and even other ones, we will enter in more and more in detail about the content of this particular one. So this will be brief. It will be just a mention of the verse and some brief words. So let's recall the third verse. The third verse of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu about the Angas of Bhakti. We already went through the first two ones. And the third one says, hearing, no, I will share it with you in the chat. Okay. So there it is. So the verse says, hearing, chanting, and all the other limbs of Vaidhi Bhakti are also to be engaged in on the path of Raganuga. In other words, they will practice those items, the devotees, the Raga Bhaktas, that are proper for their own mood, with the exception of those items contrary to their own mood. This is what the learned ones have ascertained. So this is the verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So now let me share with you the last part of the 11th verse of this first part of Raga-vartma-candrika, where Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is sharing his own commentary on this. So here I shared in the chat, so I will read it, share some brief words, and we'll finish here. So he's saying, in this way, the first two verses quoted from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu describe the subject matters of Shmaran and Brajavas, residence in Braj, while the third verse will describe the various aspects of Vajan headed by hearing. Shravanat Kirtanan Nadini, Shravan, Kirtan, and so forth, means engagement in hearing and chanting. Attaining the shelter of the feet of Sri Guru and other practices depend on them. By neglecting the sadhana of hearing and chanting, following residence of Raj will not be accomplished. To emphasize this point, the word manishibihi, the thoughtful ones, is used here. This means that intelligent people will use their discrimination to follow the limbs of bhakti that are favorable to their mood, not doing that which is incompatible to their mood. So this is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's elaboration on the third verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which further clarifies the previous two verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu already described. So here the main point being made by Rupa Goswami and also by Vishwanath is that without engaging in the main angas of bhajan, beginning with Shravan and Kirtan, interestingly, he's mentioning Shravan and Kirtan, and of course others, but without engaging in those angas of bhajan with our sadhaka deha, again, let's connect with the previous verse. If you are not perfecting your sadhaka deha by proper engagement of Shravan and Kirtan in Saranagati, the sadhaka won't attain the perfection. And that's real Brajavas. No? I mean, if you want to turn Brajavas, first it's here to say, you have to go through. If you neglect this sadhana, here says, hearing and chanting, following the residence of Braj won't be accomplished. The sadhaka won't attain perfection either through destroying Maya, Nantadas Pandit says, becoming free from the vices in his own bhajan, or through his allegiance to the people of Raj. You won't be able to do that if you are not fully absorbing your sadhaka deha and Shravan and Kirtan. And that will be actual Brajavas, real residence in Braj. As we say, what's following the Brajavasis? To follow the selfless disposition of service. So residence in Vrindavan is successful when we fully dedicate our mind and feelings of the heart to continually remain under the guidance of those devotees who are absorbed in the mellows of Raj. Interestingly, Mahaprabhu himself confirmed this once when he referred to Swarup Damodar as a pure Brajavasi. But interestingly, in his Sadhaka Deha, Swarup Damodar never visited Braj even once. He never resided in Braj. But Mahaprabhu said he's a pure Brajavasi. Of course, he's Lalita Sakhi, but in the Sadhaka Deha, he seemed to never have been in Braj. So Mahaprabhu wanted to make the point, what's Brajavas, what's residence there? So along with hearing and chanting, that one is also meant to follow as much as possible. The implied meaning here is all the 64 items of bhajan that Rupa Goswami lists in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which start with Ado Guru Padasraya, taking shelter of the Guru, and so on. So all this he mentions in the context of Vaidhi Bhakti, but eventually he says, in Raga Bhakti, you can take all those items with certain exceptions that will be made them clear in the next verse. So just to finish, the point is, we as sadhakas, and hopefully intelligent sadhakas, we should use our discrimination power, if you will, to follow. This is what is made here, the point by Vishwanath and Rupa Goswami. It's not only following every item without thinking, but you should discriminate about which items to follow. No, you shouldn't follow those who are contrary, if you will, to your own desired mode, if you already have some affinity in one direction, because that will cause some obstruction in your attainment of the ultimate goal. So for example, if some devotee already has some affinity towards attaining the Gopi Bhav, that person will continue Shravan, Kirtan about Krishna, but mainly will select passages of scriptures or kirtans or readings about the pastimes of Radha and Krishna in a certain particular way, and not doing a hodgepodge mixing of mellows that may be practical or unfavorable to his or her own mood. But again, today I'm sharing just a trailer of this, so I can finish this 11th verse. And starting from next verse, verse number 12, Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur will really delve into further detail about practices that may be favorable, unfavorable, which are those, and how to understand them, and so on. But today, I rest my case here. So thank you very much for your time. And I don't know if you have any questions you would like to share. We have some extra minutes.
Question.
Someone is.
It's Mahara. It's Mahara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wondered, what was the name of that book you mentioned, Modern History, and what was it about again? Something about Bhaktisiddhanta.
The name of the book is Modern Hindu Personalism. I can send you the information more specific if you want. You can remind me. But mainly it's a scholarly study, but made by one devotee. His professional name is Ferdinando Sardella, and he analyzes in full detail the particular time, place, and circumstance where Bhaktisiddhanta was when he started his Gaudiya Math. So he spent some time analyzing some of the points I mentioned here, but some other points we didn't have to analyze, but are really interesting to grasp, to know him much more better, to understand in a much better way why he did what he did, and to appreciate the genius behind that, and of course to understand what we should be doing now in our present context as well. So that's a very recommended one. Something else? Some other question?
Maharaj, I also have a question. Dandavat.
Dandavat.
You said in the beginning of today's class that you would describe Bhaktisiddhanta's understanding of these questions and why he made some modification. But you also said that you would say something about how we should view them today.
Mm-hmm.
But you never did.
Well, I didn't enter into full detail, actually. I just say that we should be, you are right. Thank you for inviting me. I just mentioned that we should not just do copy-paste and that there is a risk for us as grand disciples of himself of misunderstanding and over-following, over-glorifying his point without taking the time of thinking about which is the proper stance nowadays. So thank you for the invitation. Of course, our Guru Maharaj already said so many things about that, but and in his Guru Parampara booklet, he also says so. But some words, of course, we can share. Well, personally, of course, I think that as Guru Maharaj will say, any preaching strategy has its, how he calls it, like closet lifetime or something like this, that it has some specific span of time and eventually it becomes out of date. So we need to really know how to update that. And even sometimes we may do only copy paste of the tradition of some previous acharya, whoever who was Bhaktisiddhanta, Prabhupada, and it may still work for us on certain level because they were so empowered that it is said that if a very empowered sadhu establishes certain parameters and you follow them, even though they are out of date, there was so much empowerment in that person that still it will work for one or two generations after him. But at one point you will realize we need some update. So I think in the present moment, of course, Gaudiya community is pretty much well informed in many directions with the appearance of social media and with the works of Srila Prabhupada. Of course, all the different lineages have gone through the highway he himself established, if you will, from India to the rest of the world. So that brings a lot of things, of course. That brings a lot of knowledge and a lot of information that is good, but also a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of wrong comparisons and a lot of, I mean, I feel that there is some, for example, I was thinking the other day, when Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta established the sannyas ashram as part of his innovative presentation. And in the times of Bhaktisiddhanta, most of his sannyasis were really morally upright and impeccable in their example and so on. But in time, maybe starting with some sannyasis disciples of Srila Prabhupada and eventually some others, further examples in history, not necessarily all the sannyasis were given the best example, and this started to create some other type of prejudice in society, if you will, maybe at least in society of devotees, that they will see sannyas ashram, yeah, that's an excuse to fill your belly and have luxurious journey and someone paying your tickets and followers and whatever. And in part that's true. I mean, in the sense that some are really there for it. So this is a point that we spoke with Guru Maharaj when he gave sannyas to me and Vaishnava Maharaj, and we were really thinking for many days, should you give me sannyas or maybe Babaji? Maybe we want to make this point back, for example, that the original sannyas order was mainly in that connection, and Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta's adjustment was for a certain particular time in society. He wanted to create an impact with the color he chose, with the clothes he wore. And maybe that time and that circumstance is so different, so it's no longer updated, so we should continue. So I think that, I mean, at the end we concluded, let's continue sannyasis, but with all humility and no attachment to all these perks, if you will. But at least we should think about, I won't just say let's change everything nowadays, but at least let's speak about the necessity of rethinking how updated are those adjustments nowadays, because even that conversation sometimes is no longer present. Sometimes devotees just repeat the formula, do this copy paste, and again, it still works on some level. So they may feel, oh, people is coming, preaching is going on, money is coming, everything is okay, this is working, we don't need to think and change anything. But in a substantial way, there may be deprived of certain internal connection with the substance of our lineage. So in this sense, we need to rethink. And I think it's important, of course, as everything, Bhaktisiddhanta, of course, emphasized a very cautious stance, and I will still emphasize that for some, at least for the ones who are just beginning, because nowadays I've seen many cases of devotees who have knowledge of Babajis in Radhakunda or Babajis here or whoever, not necessarily Babajis. I have nothing against Babajis. Almost I become one. But my point is, they may get very easily Google about Ekadas Bab, Google about Siddha Pranali, and very cheaply, again, enter into some form of Sahajism, virtual Sahajism, social media, and speak about that cheaply. And it's important to help them to understand the necessity for really some grounding in that regard. But also at the same time, I will emphasize the importance of emphasize for some devotees, as Bhaktisiddhanta himself did, although we should understand that the campaign of Bhaktisiddhanta and the campaign of Prabhupada, they were not too much time long alive to develop their thing. No, Prabhupada was 12 years, Bhaktisiddhanta was maybe a little bit more, but he died very, very young. So my point is, he was working with his disciples, and I'm sure as much as their disciples were growing and maturing, he will also change this point. And this is the famous stance he gave. I'm mainly speaking about 80% of what Raga Nuga Bhakti is not, and 20% of what Raga Nuga Bhakti is. But as Guru will say, I'm sure that in time he will have expected his disciples to follow, to grow, and he will have changed these proportions and will start to speak more directly about the inner culture and so on. So I think for some devotees who already have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of practice, also that will be important, because we can become overtly attached and to not entering into that, because that's sahaja, and we may demonize whatever coming from the Babaji section or not. Again, so as we mentioned in one point, you can go to the two extremes, taking it too liberally or attaching so much to the detail that you think, no, we are Vaidhi Bhakti, Raganuga Bhakti for sahajas, that's another sampradaya, and get a total misunderstanding of the whole thing. So some words about that, about how I think that in general the Gaudiya communities should conduct nowadays. But again, Gaudiya community is full of individuals. So each individual will be in a different stance. So for a Prabhupada disciple who is practicing for 50 years, I will give a different advice that for a new devotee who is reading in Google about, some Babaji in Radhakund and what he Siddha Pranali just because it sounded cool in social media. so still different stances, more liberal, more orthodox or not, will be taken according to each case. But I think that we have more and more cases of senior devotees who need some further nourishing. And we have seen this necessity appearing and being nourished in a certain level on other but different acharyas. But again, in a mature way and also in an open way, be careful. There's always some sectarian stuff coming in the way. For example, these currents of only Rupanuga means Manjari Bhav, only Gaudiya Sampradaya is about that, whatever other thing you are the deviant. So, or this misconception about tattva, like we face nowadays in the community regarding Jiva tattva, Bhakti tattva, Guru tattva. So I think all these things should be addressed in nowadays community, and addressed in an open way without demonizing anyone and being open to think. But again, those may be a few, the ones who are willing to do so, but let's find those few ones. We will be fortunate for doing so. Some ideas. It's a big topic and it's a matter for a whole big discussion ongoing. So thank you for inviting me to that. So I don't know, any other questions before finishing? Okay, so I think we can finish here with the end of this 11th verse. So next class on Thursday, we will begin 12th verse, which will be an elaboration of the last part of the 11th verse we have just seen. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, patience, and sincere hearing. And see you in a few days. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Shri Vipana Chakravarti Thakur Pad ki jai, Gaur Bhaktavinda ki jai, Gaur Premananda Haribo, Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyaivacha, Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha, Nanta Koti Vaishnava Vinda ki jai, Gaur Haribo.